Welcome to Civil Dissent. These podcasts are about you. Ron and I are speaking as citizen activists, reacting to the explosive events of the time affecting us all. In the spirit of the fairness doctrine, we will air conflicting views, and you will determine what is valid. We will provide you with leads and contacts for government, business, community organizations, and more for you to take action. In democracy, information and participation are the key. Use your key, your voice, for a better world. Between Dr. Ian and myself, we have traveled to more than a dozen countries, studied political science, anthropology, communications, and more. We differ on our views, but agree friendship is more important than differences, and we invite you to feel the same way. Let's begin by checking in on what has recently caught our attention. Ron, what has your attention and why?
Well, welcome again, everyone. I'm Ron Ian, and it's nice to have you back with us. I'm sitting with my friend Ticia, and what appealed to me this week? As a matter of fact, last night I streamed a movie into my living room, and a brand new documentary, and it's called Billy Cunningham, The Happiest Man on Earth. And it was wonderful. It talks about a real-life employee at Walt Disney World, the happiest place on earth, unless maybe you're the governor. But other than that, I would say that here's a gentleman who has worked for the Disney company for 40 years, and he does tricks like after work, he gets on his bike and he'll bike 20, 30, 40 miles just to visit a cast member's home, rings the bell, and has a 5-minute performance in front of their home, whether they like it or not. And the trick is everyone likes it, and they all say, well, there goes Billy again. And he's really quite the trickster. He's been in virtually every show at Disney World for 40 years. He's a consummate entertainer, and it's quite a good documentary because it gives you a three-dimensional view of a Disney entertainer and also takes you into his real life. And it's the combination of the Disney magic and what happens at home and in his home life. So it's very well done. It's brand new, and the Mr. Cunningham is very much alive, well, and performing at Disney World these days. I highly recommend it to one and all. And Ticia, what's been going on for you this week?
Well, first let me comment that bringing up Disney at this point is rather interesting because of the topic that we're going to have as our main topic, which is essentially trans individuals. But what really comes to my mind is the fact that I am quite incensed at the fact that now apparently they're talking about breeding octopus that have 3 brains and several hearts as food, considering that the octopus is one of the most intelligent creatures on this planet, having 3 brains, being able to transform himself, have his body, his coloring, and everything else. I think we should get to know a little bit more about the octopus before we start eating it, considering they come from a totally different environment. Not only that, we're further jeopardizing the environment by this idea that we're going to dredge the ocean for cobalt, which is needed for the batteries for cars, for example, so that we don't pollute so much carbon dioxide in the air. How about we cut less trees? How about that? How about we let the trees grow, okay, and not pollute the oceans? Because frankly, with what we're doing on Earth, we may have to start trying to live in the ocean in a completely different environment. So how about we not screw that up as well? That's what's on my mind.
Couldn't agree more, which doesn't make for scintillating broadcast, but I'm totally with you, and I do know that octopuses are very intelligent, and they will, to build their own domicile, they will travel many, many miles with pieces of wood or rock or any other kind of flotsam that is available, and they will build quite sophisticated homes. And so they are tool using as well. Humans and monkeys are not the only beings that use tools, and it speaks to their great intelligence. And you're absolutely right. They're beautiful, and we need to know a lot more about them, and know we don't want to be killing something that is sentient and is an important part of our ecosystem.
Not only that, but when animals use tools, guess what? They don't go around destroying the environment. When man creates tools to use, look what we've done.
Exactly so. And with that, we will, I guess, awkwardly transition into the trans community. And it sounded like you had some strong opinions on the community and what they offer, so it's all yours.
Well, let's first, I think, give this all some historical context, because I'm not homophobic, nor am I against the trans. However, to put some things in context, for instance, apparently in some American Indian tribes, trans people were felt to be people with two souls, two spirits. And it was very interesting because they had a lot of respect for this idea of a person that could house two spirits. And during the slave era in the Americas, because having a pregnant woman slave, would really cut down on what type of work she could do, how long she could work, etc. A lot of times, the men were brought in, and the men took on what they called boy wives. And it wasn't necessarily looked down upon. It was sort of a way of survival and an economic decision. And the slave owners apparently didn't even look down on that at that time. So they considered it practical, because that way the man wasn't involved with the woman, and the woman wasn't winding up pregnant and not working. In Europe, there were many apparently cross-dressers among the nobility, and for example, several chevaliers in France were considered trans. But frankly, what I'd like to get into is I'd like the community to consider their impact internationally. Yes, they've made headways, but they've also done it in such extreme fashion that they've put many homosexuals and trans in other countries in jeopardy. Countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran and Uganda that are coming down hard on the trans community, on the gay community. And I think it's out of their fear when they see how extreme the movement has become in the United States. So I'd like to those trans people to reconsider how they're pushing their message.
Well, let me just respond that I agree with virtually everything you said, but I also think it's the problem of the governments of Iran and Lord knows Saudi Arabia, and to deal with it. And I don't think trans people should be considering how these ultra-autocratic regimes are going to deal with the population. They've got lives to lead like all of us, and it's up to the individual to live their life as best they can and as uniquely as they can. But there's also a great movement these days in the United States, and we happen to live in one of the more egregious states about this, maybe the most egregious state, the state of Florida. And we have a governor who really does seem, and the legislature, to be anti-trans in all aspects. And I think that is a cheap political stunt. I think that it's an attention getter. It's just a political way of trying to move to the right of his chief opponent. And he's doing it on the backs of a rather vulnerable population. And frankly, that engenders my anger.
It may engender your anger, but what's happening is failing to be able to necessarily overthrow the regimes in those countries, I think that diplomatically it's important to consider one's actions and how they impact the population of those countries. I mean, just because it's human to human, and we have some responsibility to them there. So it's important not to keep, for example, engendering fear in people with extreme actions. I mean, right now, you have families that feel that the nuclear family is being attacked. You have religious people who fear that, that they're being attacked religiously and the preservation of their beliefs. You have people that fear that there's an attack on future generations if, because of the way that much of the lifestyle is being presented. And I'm just I believe that we can coexist, and we can coexist well, as long as we're not creating fear amongst each other.
Well, right. But I do not see any example at all of the trans community negatively impacting any of the constituencies that you mentioned. I think there is fear in the air, and it's easy to spread fear. It's easy to spread disinformation these days. My God, if I was watching something like Fawn News 24 hours a day, I'd be probably shaking under my bed. And of course, all AM radio all talk radio these days is totally monopolized by all hate hosts, and so it's not talk radio; it's all hate radio, unfortunately. And so there is an impetus and a reason for certain populations to be afraid, because you know what, spreading fear is profitable, and we're going to continue with this conversation on the trans community, and we're going to do so right after this.
On our website, we are hosting a competition. Send in your most meaningful quote, including if you make one up, and we will use the winning quote at the end of the show and send you a $25 Amazon gift card. You can submit more than one quote, and we will give away up to 3 Amazon gift cards. Submit quotes by August 1st, 2023.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Ron Ian, and I'm with Ticia Bauza, and we are the hosts of Civil Dissent, and we invite you to listen to our episode and the first 2 if you happen to miss them, and there'll be many more to come. And now let's turn it back over to Ticia.
Well, to address a point that you said that you didn't know that these countries are really being impacted in any way, foreign countries, Uganda has passed laws now that really require death penalties. That, I think, is pretty horrible. And that, I think, is almost a direct trigger to what they see happening and the fear that they have of what's happening in this country. So I'm just asking people to consider a more diplomatic way. If they want to be accepted, fine. I think that they have a right to be accepted. I think they have the right to their lives. However, I mean, really, a little decorum. Stop making caricatures of women. As a woman, I can tell you, I don't appreciate it. I don't think very many women appreciate it, separate and apart from all of the other issues that come up. And when I say caricatures, I don't just mean the professional drag queens, because frankly, they're artists. And I respect their art, and they're very entertaining, and they're very talented. But I do refer to just the other day being at a restaurant. Here's 2 men with hairy legs, wearing dresses, sitting like men with their legs spread wide open, and they want to be accepted. Okay? I don't think so. That's, I think, pretty hard for anybody to take. I don't care what their gender is.
Oh, what was the restaurant and what was their table number?
No, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not gonna embarrass the restaurant by bringing that up.
Oh, you're making me hungry there. But let me say this, that I could imagine the civil rights marchers and sit-in people of the 60s and 70s saying, well, we can't create public disturbance because we might make the Ku Klux Klan angry. Oh my, let's behave a lot better and put on suits and say yes sir and no sir. I don't buy that for a second. The idea is, what are you going to do? Create your own activity based on lowest common denominator? That's no way to live. That's no way for free Americans to live. And I really reject living for lowest common denominator. What I do see is in a state like ours, and in many others in the South, and typically, in fact, the ones I'm thinking of are all red, as they say, they are removing gender-enhancing and or blocking hormones for young people under parental control to make their lives much more difficult, to the point where anecdotally we are seeing entire families leave states because their child is miserably unhappy. Enlightened parents want to support their child, and they are being discouraged from doing so by, in some cases, new state law. Our state happens to be one of them, but we're not alone. And so this is big government interfering once again into the lives of the American people and denying rights that had been theirs, but thanks to the new fear and loathing campaign by some of the governors and legislators in America, Americans are losing more of their rights, and in many cases now they're having to move to other states just to support their children and keep them from being bullying. I think that's pathetic, and I want to call out the politicians who don't have the guts to support their own citizens and need something like a scare tactic just to stay in office or enhance their political careers to, God forbid, the White House.
Again, I point out that the wonderful thing about this country is that if something is not working for you in one state, you can move to another state. If you have imagination and abilities and opportunities, which exist, that's exactly how it should work. It shouldn't be across the board. It's the same for everyone. It should be democratic. It should be that you can move and you can pick up your life and make it different elsewhere. As far as you brought up children, well, let me tell you something. All neuroscientists basically agree, and you can look this up in the American Medical Association. The brain is not completely formed, nor the decision-making abilities, until someone is in the case of males in particular, essentially about 25. The other thing is that the American medical community has muzzled a lot of its doctors in the past, and this comes from my conversation with people in the medical field. In the past, if a child had questions about their gender, a boy would be given testosterone, a girl would be given hormones. They would try to rebalance an imbalance in the body. Now, instead, they're being given surgery if they want. And parents half the time don't even know where kids have escaped to have some of this done. All of this is really, really very, very, very sad because children don't know who they are. They often go through phases. And right now, they're being allowed extreme decisions that they are frankly not mature enough to make. Well, the American Pediatric Association is totally in favor of these very safe drugs with minimal side effects. Well, they're not very safe. It's not minimal side effects, okay? And it's the money that's involved with Big Pharma. Sorry. Once again, the American Pediatric Association and the AMA are in favor of these drugs, and if you read their literature, you find out to be true. Fact is, not only have I read literature, but I've talked to a number of doctors that feel, frankly, muzzled. Well, I don't know who you talked to, but hopefully they had real MD degrees. I'm not sure that sounds that way. How about pediatricians?
I love
That's who I talk
pediatricians.
to.
In fact, I used to have one.
Okay.
But the idea is that most of them are saying that no, younger and younger children are aware of their identities. And as a matter of fact, parents, even in year one, sometimes can recognize if a child is gay. And they would say, boy, the child is whatever at the very earliest ages. And so they know younger than we used to think that what they are, and all the parents are trying to do is support them, and they're being discriminated against about even using proper bathrooms, which is ridiculous. There are children who are having unfortunate accidents because they're not allowed to go into the bathroom of their choice in school. In fact, there are a few compassionate nurses that let these challenged children use their bathrooms. And so this is no way to treat children. And so they're different. They're not worse. And having your head in one place and your body in another place, that's more than challenging enough. I don't think I could handle it. Particularly, I couldn't handle it without parental support and family support. And what you're seeing now is, if they don't get that support, you know what you're seeing? A high rate of suicide.
Listen, before I address such a big load of crap, all right, I'd like to let you know that what the statistics show is, one, that when they undergo all of these procedures, they limit their life by 10 to 15 years. They have less time, okay? That their life is cut short between 10 and 15 years, number one. Number two, having spoken to people in positions in the gay community, they're among the first ones that admit that too often after transition, because it does not meet their expectations and fantasies, they wind up committing suicide after they've gone through the horrors of it. Also, you talk about children knowing. Let me tell you, all that they know is the particular phase that they're going through. And if they make decisions before their next phase, those are decisions that could create tremendous, horrible consequences later on in their lives. In Japan, they unfortunately lowered the age that someone could have an operation, I think, to 15. That's way too young for a boy. That's way too young. That's often younger than he's ever first had a sexual experience, for God's sakes.
Well, let me just simply say that in the United States, it's minimally 18, and we're not talking about horrible procedures. We're talking about a proven medication that's been approved by the American Medical Association, the CDC, and these drugs are not new. And if there's a change of mind, you stop taking the drugs. So now I will say that
not
you
that
make
easy.
some. No, it's pretty easy to stop medication.
No, it's not that easy. It's not that easy for the body. It's easy enough just to stop, but it's not that easy for the body to readjust. And let me explain something. I come from a position of having worked in the past in media with people like Miguel Pinheiro, who had the young family made up of ex-gang members, many of whom, for example, would have homosexual experiences but not consider them homosexual because they were doing it just for the money. I mean, you have to consider, and these were teenage boys, you have to consider where their ability to make judgments were. In the past, I was fortunate enough to meet people like Quentin Crisp, who was just an amazing, gentle human being, and he happened to be homosexual. And yet, transvestites refused to appear with him on a show that was being produced. Why? Because these transvestites didn't want to be confused with being homosexual. But now the lines are so blurred. And if they're blurred for the adults, can you imagine what it's doing to children?
Since that's an intimate relationship of parents and children, I don't believe the parents or the children are more confused by a solid, supportive, loving household. But I will say this, one has to be very careful about rash decisions. One has to be very careful, you're right, about doing things on a whim, doing things as a fad or doing things in a phase. This is very, very personal. I could see that at times radical mistakes have been made, but I will tell you they are the small minority, and this is something that has to be considered deeply by the family, but the state should have no place in discriminating and making these young people targets in their own schools and in their own environments. But I think you raised some very good caution flags about the process.
One of the things that I would conclude with is that Dr. Erica Anderson, a transgender psychologist, took the position that parents should be informed and educated and encouraged to help their children. But apparently many of the actions that are taking place in the schools are not to inform the parents.
Well, I do see that we're kind of coming up against it, so I want to thank everyone for listening, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And though we strongly disagree on this one, perhaps I can invite you out for coffee con leche at Hamburger Mary's.
Oh, that sounds wonderful, and I'd just like to thank you and a lot for the time and the attention to this subject, which I think is very important. You're right; it's very important, and I hope that we can pick up the conversation and on another show soon.
Yes, we will. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again very soon on Civil Dissent. Thank you for listening to Civil Dissent. If you agreed with a view you've heard today, or if you have thoughts of your own, go to our website, civildissent.com, to find references where you can make a real difference. Take action, and see you next time on Civil Dissent.